AFC East week here at White Widow Sports. Brian, this is the third team we're talking about. It's the Miami Dolphins. And my question to you is, could we be looking at a hot seat head coach looking at the Dolphins and Mike McDaniels? What do you think?
All depends on their quarterback and whether he can go concussion free or not. That's
Yeah.
just my take on it.
Yep. So 8-9, they finished second in this division despite the injury issues. Obviously, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle spent their time in the tent, but the big thing was Tua Tagovailoa. His concussion issues have become well documented at this point. We've said it in another video this week. He is one concussion away from possible retirement. There were a lot of people that had already advised him not to come back after last year, and the guy wants to play football, and he's actually pretty good at it when he's on the field. But you got to think quality of life has to play a part in his decision at some point. And it is a very scary thought of what could happen if he takes another helmet-to-helmet hit the way that he has before. And this was a fourth-ranked defense. We talked about the New York Jets yesterday and their third-ranked defense. This was a very good defensive team, but the offense struggled. This is supposed to be one of the more explosive units in the NFL. But when you take when you take the starting quarterback out, there aren't a lot of teams that can keep up as far as production goes. And that's exactly what happened to them. 325 yards a game. It was good for 18th in the league. But this is somebody that we think should be top 10 year in and year out with the weapons that they have. And with Tua out of the lineup, they just could not produce. I play in Dynasty League where quarterbacks are at a premium. And I invested in their backup quarterbacks once Tua went out. And it was all wasted money, because the guys that I thought were going to play ended up not playing because they also got hurt. The ones that came in were ineffective. I mean, the ball just didn't move for Miami last year when Tua wasn't in the lineup. And this is going to be one of those interesting teams because so much rides on one player, and I don't know how to feel about that for Miami. That being said, got some key departures. Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith, they are both in Pittsburgh this year. We saw a big trade. They did get Minkah Fitzpatrick back in that deal. And obviously, Darren Waller, the door was opened for him to come out of retirement. He used to be a New York Giant. He comes out of retirement specifically to come to the Miami Dolphins to fill that Jonnu Smith role up. Javon Holland, also a New York Giant now. It's a little bit of a trade-off there. Left guard Isaiah Wynn was a big loss on this offensive line, in my opinion. I believe he remains unsigned to this date. And then Anthony Walker Jr., a linebacker. He is now a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. I mean, this is a lot of big names that have left the Miami Dolphins roster. And we've talked about it in some other teams. There's only so much proven talent you can replace in a single offseason. And whereas I like the Minkah Fitzpatrick acquisition, I like them signing James Daniel, 3-year, $24 million to come in, take that Isaiah Wynn spot. And then Darren Waller, it remains to be seen what he's going to be like. He hasn't really been on the field much. They're talking about he's in the best shape of his career. How many times have you heard that in an offseason? Everybody's in the best shape of their career. Everybody's ahead of schedule when they're returning from injuries. Darren Waller is getting back to football shape, whatever that means. And they expect him to be ready to the start of the season. I think currently he's on the PUP list. But what do you think about this team and kind of the flux of talent they've had?
I think it's going to hurt them in the end. I've never been a big Dolphins fan. I know they've done good over the years, and they deserve some respect, but I don't like they're riding on one player, and it shows. It showed in the stats that you just talked about, last year. What would those stats have been if Tua had stayed in and didn't get that concussion? I think you would have seen, not double, but I do think they moved from an 18th offense up to probably a top 10 offense had he had stayed healthy all year. So that shows you, all your eggs are in one basket. That basket falls, it could be a rough slide, and they could easily see themselves in the last place in this in the AFC East.
Yeah, I mean, kind of spoiling, going a little bit out of order. I've got them 7-10, only one spot of where I had the Jets finishing this year. And we know when we talk about these records, it's a coin flip as to where some of these games are actually decided, and it could very easily go the other way. But it's kind of like what you were talking about with Tua in the lineup. They're probably a top 10 unit. With Tua out of the lineup, they're probably a bottom 10 unit. And looking at some of the moves that they made, I mean, yeah, they brought in Zach Wilson to be his backup, but where has Zach Wilson found success in the NFL? It wasn't with the New York Jets and it wasn't with the Denver Broncos. I'm not really expecting a career resurgence here with the Dolphins either. Maybe he's a little bit better than the backups they had in place before, but I don't think that he comes in and keeps this offense afloat either, even with the good weapons that are present. They waited until the seventh round to take another quarterback. And so, depending on how you feel about Quinn Ewers coming out of Texas and think maybe he could be the future guy if Tua Tagovailoa was hurt, I tell you, Brian, I'm just not really high on this quarterback room in general. If it's not Tua, it's very much bust. And I don't think that they have done enough to solidify that room and almost make them prepared for the inevitable Tua missed games. And at this point, you don't want to wish an injury on anybody.
Mm-mm.
But if Tua were to get hurt, I want it to be anything below the neck. Let him
Sure.
tear a UCL, let him tear an ACL, let him turf toe. It does not matter. But from the neck up, just leave the guy alone. Do not scramble those eggs any more than they already are, because that's a shaken omelet already.
But I've said it in the past with some, Cam Scataboot. We love that guy. Obviously, if you've watched any of our podcasts, he's always mentioned and we talk about him being a head down runner and a hard runner. Tua, you're not that guy, brother. Stop doing that. You scare all of us. I don't want to see anybody, obviously with a concussion, I played football. I guarantee you I had a few. I played back in the day when it's like throw some dirt on it and get back out there. But these days and times, there is a lot more information out there. I don't want to see that happen. I'm sure none of the fans, and they have great fans, just an outstanding fan base. They don't want to see that happen. Obviously, because they want that top team or top 10 offense and not a bottom 10 offense. But just for the guy in general, you don't want to see it. He comes from a good family, great upbringing, but no head down running, please, sir.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. The biggest concern for this team is Tua's missed time. It absolutely cripples this team. Tua has only played a full season once in his 5 years in the NFL. And at this point, you almost have to bet against him, not only as a fan, as a viewer of NFL football, as a fantasy football player, whatever your involvement with this sport is, you have to bet against the fact that Tua is going to play the full season because he's only showed you once in 5 years. There's a 20% record of him doing that. That's not where I want to park my money. And when you start looking at the other options, secondary and tertiary options for signal callers, it's not very inspiring. I do kind of like some of what they did in the draft. First round pick, Kenneth Grant, was a defensive tackle out of Michigan. This was somebody that in some draft classes could have been a top 5 pick. He falls to them at 13. I like that. I like that for their defense. Obviously, this was a very good defense already, and I think it's going to continue to be a good defense. Maybe not a top 5 unit, but still a top 10 unit anyway. And I like what Kenneth Grant adds to that. I think that was worthwhile. What I really like, and probably my favorite pick of this draft, came in the second round, pick 37 overall. Jonas Savanaia, an offensive guard out of Arizona. We talked about how much it means for Tua to be in the lineup, on the field, and any investments that they can make in the offensive line, keeping him clean. If he plays smart football, if they protect him and he protects himself, it bodes well for your chances of being a competitive football team. And so any investments that they can make on the offensive line, paying $24 million for James Daniels to come in, using a second round pick, a top 40 selection on Savanaia out of Arizona, fortifying the trenches and letting him be in a clean pocket, it's paramount right now. Fifth round pick, Jordan Phillips, defensive tackle out of Maryland. Again, coming right in with Kenneth Grant, an infusion of talent on that defensive line. They needed it. You love to see it. And then a couple of offensive picks towards the end of the draft. I mentioned Quinn Ewers being their 7th round pick coming out of Texas. He's going to be the 3rd string quarterback to start the season. It's going to be interesting to see if he can beat out a Zach Wilson and take that second spot on the depth chart. And if that would give Dolphins fans a little bit more hope. If he's able to supplant what I think was the second overall pick in his draft class, and Zach Wilson coming out of BYU. If a seventh rounder can beat a former second overall pick, it should inspire Dolphins fans a little bit more to think, okay, maybe this kid has what it takes to contribute on Sundays. And at this point, you just hope we don't have to find out because we want Tua out there. But then in the sixth round, Ollie Gordon. If you told me 2 years ago that Ollie Gordon was a sixth-round pick, I would have laughed in your face because he was every bit as good as what we know Ashton Genty was last year. Something happened. That offense changed. What they asked him to do changed, and he fell off. He went from being the most productive player in college football to being incredibly inefficient on the ground. And if he can somehow be humbled by being a sixth-round pick, if he can get himself in a better position being with the Dolphins, yes, he's behind a couple of very talented running backs now. He's going to have to earn his opportunities. But he also represents a skill set and a body type that isn't currently present in that locker room right now in the running back group. It's something that I think Ollie Gordon, being as big as he is, with the speed, with the momentum that he carries with the ball in his hands, maybe he carves out a role. I think he's an interesting one because the two guys ahead of him are not exactly pinnacles of health either. I've got a nephew that I'd be in a lot of trouble, and so would you, if we did not bring up the name of Devon Achane coming out of Texas A&M, one of Tyler's favorite players. And I'm going to shout out Tyler now. He loves Devon Achane, and he should. Very, very unique weapon, very unique skill set, dangerous with the ball in his hands. He is almost like a light version of Jahmyr Gibbs. He can run the ball between the tackles. He kills you as a receiver, but he's a small guy, a wee little lad in the backfield. He is not equipped to handle a full workload. And so that's somebody that maybe you look at missing some games, missing some snaps. You know, if Ollie Gordon having the frame that he does, if he can prove that he can shoulder that work a little bit more, as far as a sixth-round pick goes, he's more interesting than most of them.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I think their defense is going to keep them in a lot of games, and we're kind of moving into concerns and strengths and stuff like that. I think their greatest strength is their defense. I think it's going to be more of the same. I think they've got a great defense down there. I think it's going to keep them in games, and you know, that's Tua's health is my concern. You know, we said it earlier. I don't want to see this guy hurt. You know, being a Georgia fan, I didn't like him when he was at Alabama. Didn't want to get him hurt. You know, not being a Dolphins fan, I still don't want him hurt. You know, so protect this guy. He is going to do your offensive well, but it's just you got to keep him healthy.
Yeah, and I think if I was going to argue with you a little bit on there, I think I have a different strength for this team because I think it is something that shows on both sides of the ball. It's not just their defense, but it's one thing that you've heard time and time again. It's something you can't coach. It's something you can't teach, and it's something that has uniquely become the Dolphins' identity, and it's speed. Yeah. They are explosive. They are fast. It's almost like a resume question where they say, what was your 40 time? I ran a 4.29. You're hired. It's just they don't want you if you're not fast. And like I was talking about with Ollie Gordon and as big and strong as he is, you don't see it because Jalen Wright is fast. Devon Achane is fast. Tyreek Hill's Twitter handle or X handle, whatever you want to call it, is literally @Cheetah. That's how fast he is. He's literally a cheetah in a man's body playing football. Jalen Waddle, almost just as fast. You remember watching him at Alabama and how uncoverable he was for the Crimson Tide. Speed is what the Dolphins are, and speed kills in the NFL. So as good as their defense is, comparing that to the fastest offensive group of skill position players in the NFL, possibly even in NFL history, I just don't even know who you would compare it to just position by position. I don't know if you've ever seen a lineup as fast as this team has been assembled. It's got to be considered their biggest strength because it's something you can't coach and it's something that nobody else can compare it to. It gives them a trump card that no other team could ever play above them. Nobody is going to be as fast as them. And with their coach being who he is, with the identity that he carries, It's something that he knows how to put all these positions in, or all these players in a position to succeed. And I think that's going to be worthwhile. And I think it also attributes to fantasy success as well. So looking at fantasy football, who from the Miami Dolphins would you want on your fantasy team?
Well, I mean, you just said it. There's three, and I know you're going to pick the same three. It's HN, Hill, Waddle. Easy. Stay away from Tua. You don't know where. I think he's a great quarterback. I think he can make all the plays. I don't know that he's going to be there all year, and that's going to hurt you. So I would stay away from him. But yeah, those three right there, you can't go wrong with them. The only thing is HN, like you said, he is getting long in the tooth. He does have a few injuries on him. He's not a big guy. So do you have him every week? That's hard to say, but I still think you pick him up at some point in the draft.
Yeah, and I think too, it's not that HN is old. I know that's not what you're saying. As far as being long in the tooth, he's a very young player. He's only been in the league a couple of years. But when you look at the running back position, there's only so much mileage. And a guy like Derrick Henry is kind of like a Ford F-350, both in body composition and mileage. You've been a truck guy. A good truck can last you a long time. Yep. Whereas some of these other cars, they might be faster, they might be flashier, more exciting, but you could blow an engine at 30,000 miles. Sure. So that's HN. He does not have the same mileage. So we talk about being long in the tooth. I don't want anybody to crucify us in the comments. What we're saying is he's not going to have a long career. He's here for a good time, not a long time.
Absolutely.
Devon Achan's here to party, and he picked a great city to do it in because Miami has already gotten some very good players in trouble. But like you said, he's somebody that when he's on the field, he is so explosive. He's going to be good for fantasy. He catches a lot of passes. He's great for the league. It's just a matter of, would you want to rely on him to be your RB1 versus a high upside RB2? That's more where I would feel comfortable with him. But like you said, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, those guys are great. Put them in your lineup every week because chances are they're more likely to score a 40-yard touchdown than they are to give you 0 points. So you're going to want those guys in your lineup week in and week out because they can literally sway your matchup. The only other name that I might think is interesting to watch is Darren Waller. If you can get him in the final rounds of your draft and keep him as your backup tight end, I think he represents a lot of upside purely because of what Jonnu Smith was for this offense last year. If he can come in and be anything like Jonnu Smith or better, I mean, this is somebody that has been a top tight end before. Obviously, it's been a few years since then and a failed rap career later. It's one of those things that Darren Waller, if he returns to form and can take a sizable target share in this offense, what Jonnu Smith was last year, it's one of those things where he's going to be interesting for fantasy, but I want to put him on my bench until we figure that out.
Sure. All right, guys, I believe that's going to do it for the Miami Dolphins. Like I said, hopefully you love this video and we weren't too bad on the Dolphins. I don't think we were. I think we're pretty high on them overall, but hopefully they have a good year and they protect their quarterback. But for us, we are out of here and we will see you guys in the next video.